All right, we are live once again. I think this is week 13. See some cool names in the chat, see some recurring names, see some new faces. For everyone that's new here, this is a weekly, let's call it like weekly marketing webinar, but more than just a webinar, more like a weekly marketing fireside chat that we have with certain marketing experts all across influencer marketing and other tangential areas to influencer marketing. And I'd say that one of the biggest areas that everyone's always trying to reach and trying to understand and trying to be a part of is Gen Z. And maybe it's a little cringe to even say that, but the fact that I was able to get the person who is below me on the screen here today is amazing, because that is all her and her team does every single day. Shaina, welcome to our weekly marketing webinar.
Thank you so much for having me, Danny. Appreciate it. Excited to be here.
Yeah, right back at you. Can you give people like 30 seconds, a minute rundown of your background, what you do at Juve Consulting, what even is Juve Consulting?
Yeah, happy to. So my name is Shaina. I'm the co-founder CMO here at Juve, which is a purpose-driven Gen Z marketing company. And our ethos as a company is rooted in this idea that so often we are talking about young people, to your point, but so rarely get to hear directly from them. And there are incredible 14, 15, 16-year-olds that have a lot of opinions on the world and can speak articulately to their thoughts and behaviors and opinions. And we exist to bridge that gap. So we basically pair Fortune 500s, nonprofits, startups, political campaigns, and brands directly with Gen Zers. So anyone who works in a project is 27 or younger as part of our team. I do have some millennials on my team. My COO is like 38 and joined about 2 years ago, but we've been around since 2016, and the majority of the business has always been led by Gen Z and has almost always had Gen Zers in the room up until very recently. So feel very, very lucky and fortunate to be able to do this work. And as CMO, I get to oversee a lot of our relationship building between non-Gen Z and Gen Z actors like clients and community partners, as well as Gen Z activists and artists and influencers. So it's incredible to be able to do that kind of translation work. And I thought I was going to work at the UN for the longest time. I never thought I would be in marketing per se. But then I very, very quickly realized how bureaucratic those spaces are. So I was like, I don't know if this is for me. And I feel very lucky and fortunate to be in so many spaces where we get to be creative and call things how they are and be progressive people in the world of business. So can't really complain, but definitely did not think I would be working in marketing. That's for sure.
It's funny how that works out for so many.
Somehow it does, yeah. And I feel like there's no playbook, at least when it comes to marketing itself. Even if you were a marketing major or took some classes, it's really about storytelling. So it's special to be doing this work.
And I feel like that's what Gen Z feels as well, is like, there is no playbook. Like, we're going to change it up. We're going to do something very different. And when we do something different that hits, the rest of the world will follow. But tell me this, it sounds like you're speaking with Fortune 500s, Fortune 100s, big nonprofits, all of these companies that want to tap into Gen Z, or maybe even just understand Gen Z. What's the question that they usually ask? Like, when they come to you guys and they go, hey, like, we know who you are, we've heard all of the great work that you've done. Like, where do we start? Where do you help them, or what's that first question they're usually asking?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most of the time people are just trying to get a grasp on what is Gen Z spending their time doing on screens, whether it's how do we think about TikTok as a search engine? Why do we follow the creators that we follow? Why do we use humor as a coping mechanism? And what does the role look like for a brand to really lean in and engage with that? I think the flip side of that is also this question of how do we retain young talent? And at a time when there's so much turnover, even given the state of the economy when it comes to people's jobs, they want to retain Gen Z talent, but find it really difficult. So I think the future of work and understanding how to create different workplaces that are tuned to Gen Z is really important to brands as well.
So you talk about cringe and absurdity and humor and such. Why, and maybe you don't have this answer, but why do you think this came to be? Why is it that Gen Z sees the world through this mask of humor, maybe sees this mask, or through this mask of cringe?
I think every generation has pushed the status quo when it comes to being thoughtful around social movements and wanting the world to just be better, point blank, period. I think the difference with Gen Z when we talk about why are they so angry or frustrated is that the digital age has really warped our sense of self and also our sense of understanding of the world around us, right? We grew up at a time that was bookmarked by 9/11 and COVID-19. And what that means is that ultimately, when we're thinking about our lives as young people, it's not like these incredibly momentous social and political movements didn't shape everyone around us. It's just that technology and the internet has shaped the way that we now understand the sense of the world. There's no sense of just turning the TV off and then saying, I'm going to move away from what's happening in the world, because so much of it feels communal and so much of it feels like we're held accountable. And I think because of that, humor does feel like a coping mechanism in some ways, but it's a really, really human, intimate type of feeling for people to want to lean into, right? That's not something that I think is necessarily unique to Gen Z in particular, but I think being social media natives, unlike millennials who are digital natives, means that we use these things as crutches or as ways of really expressing ourselves, right? Either to liberate ourselves or either to confine ourselves to specific feelings and moments. And that's why this notion of being cringe or absurdity or humor has really become something that's really mainstream in terms of building affinity with Gen Z, when it's done right, of course.
Well, that's a good point. When it's done right, how is it done right? Because I know the feeling of meeting an uncle or a grandparent who I haven't seen in a while, and they try to say something like, "Oh, I'm hip with the kids still," and you're like, "Oh, it's enough. Like, don't say
Yeah.
that again." And I feel like there might be those instances as well of brands coming through and trying to be that thing, but maybe trying to be the thing that they're not.
Mm-hmm.
How does Gen Z value brands when they do tap into absurdity, cringe, more of this humor that you're talking about?
Yeah, the first part of it definitely is how do we think about language, and even social media itself has become a language that people get to communicate through and express themselves through. I think the brands that do it most successfully oftentimes do have a young person in the room. Maybe they're still an intern and not your executive vice president, but having someone that is from this community that can be a sounding board really translates to your work. To your point, you can't necessarily just use some Gen Z vernacular and then attempt to retroactively make it fit in a campaign and say, we're resonating with young people because we think we use the right language. It's like this difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. And I think that applies to the same way that we think about language and vernacular, especially considering the communities that so much of this language is coming from. And I think the other part of it is how much of a risk do you want to be able to take, right? If you're really clear on your brand voice and messaging and your intentionality in terms of your purpose, then it should be really clear how you want your content to show up in those ways. But I think most brands can't even come to you and say, this is my one word why, one sentence why of why we exist and what our mission with our company is. Then how do you expect your own employees to know that? And then how do you expect consumers to know that, right? So I think some of it is just internal brand building and understanding your vision and your missions and your value. But I think the other part of it is how do we think about language and how do we think about the right people who understand culture to show up? Because 14-year-old girls knew that Justin Bieber and One Direction was hot before the rest of us did, and that's going to be true for every generation, right? Even with Gen Alpha. So I think it's just a matter of understanding who really becomes cultural tastemakers and the arbiters of culture. And even if other generations are adopting trends, Gen Zers are always the first ones to begin and start those trends. So there's still a level of ownership and accountability there, even if other generations become a part of the conversation later on or help us co-create these trends and ideas together.
You talk about the 14-year-old girls controlling culture, understanding Justin Bieber's hot, understanding One Direction's hot before anyone else is, and I so agree. There's actually a book, forget the name, but there's a book about this, about how like young female or like young fangirls kind of run the internet, and so
Yeah, totally. I had a One Direction fan page when I was 14, and now I work in marketing. So I don't know, maybe it was willed, but yeah, 100%. I think that's completely correct. Yeah.
it's interesting. So, okay, you talk about cultural appropriation versus appreciation. What is the line there? Or maybe I'm gonna ask a different question. Is there any merit to a brand saying, we are not Gen Z and we're not going to try be Gen Z and just accept us for who we are? Or should every brand that sells to Gen Z try to use the right language in the right way over, to your point, this long period of time?
No, I think it's all about intentionality. If you look at when Gen Zers signed up in record numbers for AARP membership, that's something that most people thought of as joining after retirement for retirement benefits or for discounts or coupons. But someone just made a TikTok and said you can sign up at any moment to be an AARP member. There's no age limit or like boundary to when you can be a member. And Gen Zers literally like broke the website. They signed up in record numbers. Millions of Gen Zers signed up because they wanted discounts, and everyone wants to get their bag. But I think that's really indicative of a fact that that's not a Gen Z facing brand. They don't have a specific brand bible or a color palette or influencer or creator. It's just the product itself. So I think understanding your relationship as a consumer in terms of reaching Gen Z audiences is important, right? We control so much in familial spending as well as in our own personal spending, and that number is only going to increase as time goes on. So the market cap value is of course incredibly important for Gen Z consumption, but I think outside of that, it's also important to reconcile what it means for your brand to show up in culture, and then also maybe just what your product and your values also stand for, because there's no one real monolithic answer of how you can reach Gen Z per se, even if there are trends and behaviors that we are pointing to as resonating with this cohort.
Talk to me about the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. How long does a brand have to use, or does the brand have to adopt the language from here on out to be seen as appreciating it compared to a moment in time, which might be seen as appropriation?
Hmm. I think it's less so around this idea of being trendy and talking about things in real time, which is still relevant. And of course, there are like what you saw with Tube Girl, like Sabrina is everywhere. Like she's in a Boss campaign. She was running the New York Fashion Week runway for Mac. Like there are brands, and that's really unheard of. Brands actually so quickly hopping on a trend, hopping on an influencer, and being able to collaborate with them. But I think I was really impressed that brands actually were able to do it in such a quick turnover, because that's not typical for legacy companies. So I think some of it is just how do we break away from the norm of how things have been done to be able to adopt to how quickly culture is changing. It's the same reason why research reports and agency work doesn't work with Gen Z, because you could do a 6-month longitudinal study and our trends are changing day by day that your study isn't even significant anymore because the trend cycle has changed so quickly. So I think some of it is just like how we conduct business hasn't caught up to the way how technology and culture changes so much more quicker. And I think the other part of what you're saying around this piece of culture appreciation appropriation is more so that when you're in kindergarten, you learn the importance of a primary source, that if you're talking to someone who comes from a specific community or a background or lived experience, you should trust their judgment because the person who's living that reality is the expert on that said reality. And I think more of this question is rooted in how do we get the right actors and right stakeholders in the right rooms to give us that perspective building? Because maybe in talking to someone that is from that community, you realize this campaign's not going to resonate enough, or you don't have the ability to do it justice, or this doesn't actually align with what the company goals are for the next quarter, whatever it might be. But I don't think we are intentional with how we think about brand building or how we think about campaigns. It's much more so, what's the ROI? What's the metric? How many things can we get off the shelf in X amount of time, rather than realizing the importance of just building brand affinity or brand awareness. And I think that's a very difficult line to toe when you have objectives and KPIs and goals that you want to reach. But a lot of this stuff has also become the fact that we're in an age of organic. If someone just makes UGC about your product or talks about your brand without any paid, that's the best advertising anyone can do. Gen Zers still rely on word of mouth to be able to get recommendations on their products. So the odds are I'm probably going to go to my group chat before I go to an Amazon review to make sure that I made the right purchase or making the right decision. So I think some of those intangibles are what matter more when we're thinking about this question of cultural appreciation, appropriation, and intentionality, rather than, okay, I have a goal or a metric for a campaign. What's the quickest way, easy and least friction, like the least amount of friction that I can feel in order for a campaign to launch.
I think that's a fascinating realization, and it's not a revelation. It's not like wow,
Mm,
like kind of like that's insane.
yeah.
But what it is, to your point, is that it's a way of being. Like
Mm-hmm.
who Gen Z is, it's a way of being. It's a way of living, and there's no thought as to why they're doing so. They're just doing so because that's who they are.
Yeah.
So by being able to be aligned with that and understand that you don't have to force things on top of them, but it's like to your point, where they spend their time in the group chats. Cool, find a way to somehow get into the group chats
Exactly.
organically. So
Yeah.
with you, when you work with these Fortune 500s, what are the best characteristics of the brands that you work with that are adopting what you're talking about, are really doing the right things with Gen Z, are
Mm.
marketing the right way, are running the right campaigns? What are those characteristics that you see?
I think it's listening and then co-creating in the sense that Gen Zers also are a difficult cohort of people to even manage. I get to see it in my own workplace. I'm not here to say that somehow we have it all figured out, as much as I love my team. But I think we have a lot to learn from brands also that have been doing this for years and have legacy and can speak to the things that have been really successful and creative in their own work. So listening goes both ways between Gen Z and non-Gen Z, so that we can actually be on the same page and feel those tension points, right? And lean into them and say, like, I do feel uncomfortable from that. Why do I feel uncomfortable from that? Or I think there's something here for a campaign, but I don't know if like my upper management would approve that. How do we make a case for them to effectively understand the value of this? So I think a lot of those conversations are about listening and leaning in. And then the second part of it is, rather than just coming up with a campaign brief at the end of a project, being able to really co-create with our clients is when we found the most success. And the best case study that I can point to is the work that we've done with Coachtopia. And it's the first time a luxury fashion brand like Coach launched a sub brand called Coachtopia, and it was all around the circular economy and circular design. So the notion was that they were really going to do business differently and think about the fashion industry differently, where no part of a Coach bag is going wasted, and all of those scraps and leather pieces become repurposed in this collection that's all aimed at reaching Gen Z. But they built a community before they built a product. So they were like, we have an idea, we want to vet it, we know Gen Z cares about sustainability. Do you think circular design and the circular economy will resonate with them? And we were like, we think this is like a thesis proof point that we can investigate further. So not only did we build out the entire community for them, like we sourced creatives and fashionistas and activists that cared about this issue, that could really give them insights back and forth. And Coach really listened to what people said in the room. It wasn't just a checkbox for them to greenlight this project. It took over 2 years to build it out, and then the collection sold out 3 times in 3 weeks. And I think it's a testament to the fact that they like knew their values, they knew their one sentence why, and then they also built a community that was always going to be there for them as a sounding board, as a way to test and learn, and then also to be able to like lean in the right ways, right? To call them out, to call them in, and they listened every single time. And then if you go on the website, like the models on the website are literally people on my team that are part of the Coach community. So it's insane that like everything from the product to the launch to the events that they did, everything like leaned back into that community. And I think that's what the future of business is. It's community first before it's consumer or creator first. And Coachtopia really exemplifies what that looks like.
Wow, that's super, super interesting. I think the point about co-creating is so interesting. And I think you brought up some great points that everyone here can learn from is you have your values as your brand, you have your one sentence as a brand and where you want to go, but the people that you're trying to work with also have an idea of where they want to go and what they want to see. And how, on that point specific, on the Coachtopia case study, how quickly did both sides see alignment? Did it take a long time to figure out what this thing was going to be, or was it immediate once the co-creation process happened that values were aligned and this idea came to be?
I think it was definitely more so alignment in the ideation and the vision of it, that this is something that we really believe in. We want to lean into it. So I think those were all true facts. I think from a co-creation perspective, it was also them saying, like, we know we want to do X. Can you give us feedback on this? Like, we just want to hear and pulse check with you. So I don't think it's us constantly coming up with all the ideas and then saying, let's get these approved from the client. It's also a matter of saying, we have a proof point on a concept that we really believe in. We want to vet it, and we get to do the vetting process for it. Or we get to say, we want to refine the ask of what we're asking the Gen Zers, or we want to refine the brief itself. But I think it was really natural in this partnership because we had a lot of trust between the two partners. So even if there were moments where, let's say, there could have been friction, it was much easier to push through that because we were on the same page, and there was so much trust and belief that that we wanted the best for both sides, for both parties. So I think it made it a lot easier. And because we were there since the beginning, there wasn't as much friction as like if you were just coming in for a project just to give feedback when it came to the client work.
So there's marketers in this room who might want to be working with Gen Z, might just want to understand it. What is the best piece of advice? Maybe not best piece, but what's one piece of advice that you would give these marketers that are in the room from some really, really big brands on maybe what the first step should be, or what they should be thinking about first before they just try put a campaign together and try reach Gen Z?
I think you should be on the platforms and in culture as much as you can, but also like try to lean on Gen Zers that maybe just aren't your kids, right? Like try and get access to people that, whether it's a creator, whether it's an influencer, whether it's just peers, people, whatever it might be, as a way of understanding culture. And I think the best CMOs are the ones that also are on TikTok and are on these platform and live action. Their feeds might look much different than my feed, and my feed definitely does not, I feel like, look like every other Gen Zers. It's like art and One Direction edits and like random aesthetic pictures of like interior decor and houses. Like I am not here to claim that my feed is more Gen Z either, but I think that's the power of knowing that everyone's social, like parasocial relationships or understanding of the world or culture is so different. So I think it's important to be on these platforms as someone who is a marketer and wants to be part of brand building, right? Like knowing that BeReal was hot before it came through, like your kids or a Gen Zer knew that, or high schoolers honestly knew that before the rest of us. So from my perspective, it's more so how can you find ways of always being in touch with culture, and then also being able to say, I care about brand building in the sense of maybe this is a risky thing to do or an experiment to do, but at least we learned a lot of value from it. And I think not enough brands get to experiment and ideate and live in the uncomfortable side of things, and instead want to feel like they've done their due diligence, have the right answer, and can just green light. Whereas I think a lot of exciting and interesting work happens in that experimentation, and not many brands always get to do that.
I'm with you. I think that's where the magic happens, in the unstructured, in the unknown. But me and you love to tell stories and love to sit at the top of the funnel. I know a lot of the marketers love to sit at the bottom of the funnel, but that's going to be something that we'll have to work out in the future. I'll say this: it's been 20 minutes. Thank you so much for jumping on. Thank you for sharing the perspective. Thank you for bringing some good examples. Thank you for even just going a step deeper and not even saying this is what it is, but telling us a little bit more about why absurdity, cringe, appropriation versus appreciation is a real thing and how it manifests. So I really appreciate your time. It was awesome chatting with you. And for everyone else that is here, again, we do this every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Next Wednesday, we're also staying in the Gen Z realm. We're talking with the CEO of Fallen Media, Sol Detach, about the idea that maybe traditional TV is looking a little bit more like TikTok. Maybe TikTok's looking a little bit more like traditional TV with different episodic shows. And so things you can tap into. But Shaina, as always, thank you so much for this. Have an awesome day. And I heard you're speaking at VidCon, so good luck with that.
Thank you. I'm excited. I appreciate you. Thank you for making the time, Danny. And I'm excited to see what you start about Gen Z next week. So
Definitely.
appreciate it. Much love. Bye.
Yeah.